In an unnamed village on the map, control was torn apart and changed hands twice within just 48 hours. The Russian army launched a lightning offensive, using overwhelming firepower to crush the defense lines and plant the flag of victory on the ruined roofs. They believed that conventional warfare had prevailed, but in reality, they had stepped right into a preset kill zone. Ukraine's proactive retreat was merely a calculated fallback aimed at stretching the enemy's formation. As soon as the trap sprang, Ukraine's M113 and BMP armored units launched a sudden counterattack, guided by a swarm of Predator drones, applying a short kill chain to wipe out all firing positions in an instant. This battle has shattered the old military logic, exposing the impotence of brute force against precision technology. The peak of the madness came when the Russian commander ordered a Grad multiple rocket launcher strike to level the village itself, slaughtering their own troops trapped inside just to halt the enemy's advance. How did Ukrainian infantry manage to clear out every bunker in bloody close-quarters combat? What terrifying scenes unfolded when FPV drones hunted down the motorcycle reinforcements across the open fields? And why did Russia's very own suicidal artillery strike become a golden opportunity for Ukraine to take complete control of the stronghold? We will dissect this in detail right now. The Russian war machine began operating under a familiar but no less brutal scenario, overwhelming firepower leading the way, with armor surging forward in its wake. Salvos of multiple rocket launchers roared, raining fire down upon the small village in Zaporizhia, turning lush green tree lines into charred gray skeletons. Under a sky thick with the smoke of gunpowder, the Russian army launched an ambitious, multi-directional offensive. They broke down their tank and armored vehicle units, coordinating seamlessly with infantry to create a suffocating pressure from all sides. Each heavy block of steel loomed forward, crushing ruined fences, while heavy artillery continuously rained down shells to suppress every enemy point of resistance. Faced with this immense pressure, Ukraine's defensive units appeared to have collapsed. They abandoned their frontline trenches, quickly retreating deep into the ruined areas before vanishing behind clouds of smoke and dust. Victory seemed firmly within grasp as Russian infantry flooded into the center of the village. Flags were raised on the remaining rooftops, and cheers of victory echoed amidst the ruins. The Russian army quickly took steps to consolidate their positions, turning the enemy's reinforced basements and old trench systems into their own fortresses. However, it was precisely in that moment of complacency that fatal vulnerabilities began to reveal themselves. The premature euphoria of the soldiers and the complacency of the field commanders created deadly gaps. Russian reconnaissance forces failed completely to control the tactical blind spots surrounding the village. Worse still, their internal communication systems began suffering severe interference, rendering coordination between troop units disjointed. They had captured the ground, but lost control over the surrounding space. In reality, the Ukrainian army's retreat was not a panicked rout born of defeat, but a cunning tactical fallback, calculated down to the square meter. This is the very art of flexible defense in modern warfare. By proactively yielding territory, Ukraine cleverly stretched the enemy's attack formation, luring Russian troops away from the protection of their long-range air defense network and drawing them right into a pre-established kill zone. While Russian soldiers were busy celebrating and searching, houses, up above, a dense network of Ukrainian reconnaissance drones had been silently deployed. These eagle eyes silently mapped out a virtual layout of every troop position and every trench the Russian forces had just taken over. Every movement, every enemy machine gun placement was transmitted directly back to the command center in real time. Ukraine had turned the village into a giant chessboard, where they held the right to the next move, while Russian forces still believed themselves to be the masters of the battlefield. Everything was ready for a multi-layered armored counterpunch, a devastating counterthrust waiting to be triggered. Before the early morning fog had time to dissipate, and while the remnants of previous artillery strikes were still smoldering, the village's false silence was torn apart by the roar of diesel engines. Ukraine did not give the Russian army time to adapt to their newly captured spoils of war. A lightning counterattack plan was activated with surgical precision. Under the cover of long-range artillery, a dense, blinding white smokescreen was deployed, covering all the main entrances to the village. This smokescreen was not merely a simple camouflage tool, it was a visual barrier, completely neutralizing the thermal binoculars and observation equipment of the Russian troops entrenched in the houses. Amidst that deadly white fog, the steel phantoms of Ukraine's M113S and BMPs dashed forward at breakneck speeds. The sound of iron tracks grinding against the crumbling asphalt created a symphony of destruction, signaling an impending wrath. The true power of this strike lay in the short kill chain, a modern military concept that Ukraine has forged into an instinctual skill. Instead of waiting for cumbersome command orders from the rear, the flow of information on the battlefield operated in real time. Squads of low-flying reconnaissance drones, weaving through the gaps in the rubble, acted as the central nervous system for the entire assault. As soon as a Russian machine gun nest or sniper position was exposed on the operator's tablet screens, exact coordinates were pushed straight to the advancing artillery and armored vehicles. It took only seconds for a 155mm artillery shell or a volley of 30mm rounds from a BMP to blow away the obstacle. This terrifying target processing speed completely stripped the Russian troops of their ability to react. The Russian soldiers inside the village fell into a state of tactical paralysis. They heard the engines, heard the explosions, but could not pinpoint where the enemy was until the barrels of Ukrainian infantry rifles were right at their windows. When the M113 armored vehicles screeched to a halt right in front of key buildings, their rear ramps burst open, and Ukrainian assault squads poured out like a whirlwind. This was when the battle entered its most brutal and primal phase, close quarters battle, CQB. In the confined spaces of dark corridors and basements reeking of gunpowder, any advantage in troop numbers or heavy weaponry became meaningless. Instead, decisiveness and individual skill were the arbiters of life and death. Ukrainian soldiers advanced in a comb formation, clearing every room with the crucial support of RPG anti-tank weapons and hand grenades. Deafening explosions rang out inside the concrete walls, creating shockwaves that crushed the eardrums and the fighting will of the enemy. Russian troops attempted to fight back desperately from the basements, but they soon realized they were facing professional hunters who used smoke grenades to blind them and rocket-propelled grenades to level the most heavily fortified strongpoints. Every square meter of ground, every stair-step became a separate battlefield. The Ukrainian soldiers didn't just shoot, they cleaned up the terrain methodically. Once a room was declared clear, the assault squad immediately established a temporary defensive position to provide cover for the next squad advancing. Panic began to spread within the Russian ranks. Units that were already exhausted from the previous assault to capture the village now had to face a counterattacking force with superior vitality and ferocity. The desperate screams of Russian radio communications were gradually drowned out by the sound of submachine gun fire and the detonations of plastic explosives breaching doors. This close-quarters combat left no room for mercy. It was a race against time where whoever was one trigger pull faster would be the one to survive. Under the suffocating pressure and the rhythmic coordination of steel, fire, and men, the Russian defense line inside the village began to crack and then collapsed entirely, forcing the survivors to flee into the final ruined areas at the village's edge, setting the stage for an even more terrifying final chapter. As the gunfire within the village began to sparse out, a new tragedy was being written on the surrounding open fields. Realizing that the garrisoned units inside the village were being torn apart by the lightning strike of Ukrainian infantry, the Russian military commanders in the rear made a gamble of a decision. They knew that sending heavy armored columns in for reinforcement at this time would only serve as fodder for enemy artillery. Instead, an asymmetric tactic was employed. The reinforcement troops were deployed on high-speed off-road motorcycles. The calculation behind this decision was to utilize their compact size and extreme mobility to glide across minefields, evade long-range radar, and quickly close in to plug the defensive gaps. However, in the era of transparent warfare, every movement, no matter how small, could not escape the watchful eyes of the aerial surveillance network. The very trails of thick dust kicked up by the motorcycle wheels on the arid land of Zaporizhia became a death sentence for these reinforcements. From hundreds of meters above, Ukrainian drone operator squads locked onto their targets. Immediately, a swarm of FPV drones' explosive-laden predators was unleashed. The scene that followed unfolded like a digital horror movie. The tiny, cheap drones plunged down at breakneck speed, hunting down the motorcycles as they swerved in desperation. With no protective armor and no chance to escape, the Russian soldiers on the vehicles barely had time to hear the deadly buzzing before an explosion tore everything apart. One by one, the motorcycles were blown apart, turning into piles of burning scrap metal in the middle of the field. Russia's final hope for a relief force was suffocated before it could even reach the edge of the village, turning the rescue effort into a bloody rout under the fire of these flying phantoms. The failure of the reinforcements pushed the Russian command into a state of extreme psychological panic. Upon realizing that key defensive positions had completely fallen into the hands of the Ukrainian army and their own soldiers were cornered in the rubble, they executed a move that military observers call tactical madness. Instead of organizing an orderly retreat, the Russian commander ordered the Grad multiple rocket launcher battalions to rain relentless fire directly onto the center of the village. This was a brutal decision, firing upon the very positions where their own soldiers were stationed just to halt the enemy's advance. The Grad launchers roared, raining hundreds of rockets down upon a tiny, confined area. The sky suddenly lit up with long streaks of fire, followed immediately by a horrific chain of explosions that turned the entire village into a sea of flames. The rain of firepower leveled what was left of the rooftops, crushed the concrete walls, and turned the roads into deep craters. Russia's goal was to create a dead zone, to break the tempo of the Ukrainian infantry's advance, forcing the enemy to halt or retreat to avoid casualties from heavy artillery. But reality played out in a far more ironic and bloody scenario. This blind artillery strike, instead of destroying the Ukrainian army, massacred the very Russian soldiers trapped in the trenches and rubble. They were caught in the crossfire. Ahead was the Ukrainian infantry tightening the encirclement, and above was firepower raining down from their own comrades. The desperate cries for help over the radio from Russian soldiers were drowned out by the continuous detonation of artillery shells, creating a scene of absolute chaos and utter tragedy. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian forces once again demonstrated their tactical acumen and extraordinary adaptability. Guided by the reconnaissance drone squads constantly hovering above, Ukrainian commanders quickly identified the trajectory and pattern of the artillery barrage. Instead of clustering together to weather the storm, Ukrainian infantry quickly dispersed into small tactical teams, leveraging the mobility of their M113 armored vehicles to move continuously and evade the artillery impact zones. They turned the very chaos created by the Russian artillery into a smokescreen for their final advance. Operational flexibility and the ability to maintain seamless communication allowed the Ukrainian army to preserve its forces, while the madness of the enemy's artillery systematically destroyed its own remaining defensive units. The battle ended in an eerie silence as the artillery fire ceased and the smoke and dust gradually settled. The village was now nothing more than a graveyard of steel and rubble. Russia's decision to fire upon its own troops not only failed to turn the tide but also left a horrific psychological scar on the survivors. It exposed a complete collapse in the command and control system, where the lives of soldiers were trivialized in the face of formless, short-term tactical objectives. On the Ukrainian side, successfully capitalizing on the enemy's blunder helped them complete the liberation of the village more comprehensively than ever before. The boots of Ukrainian assault troops trampled over the shrapnel of Grad rockets, the very weapons meant to annihilate them as they advanced toward the center, where their flag was about to fly once more amidst the desolate ruins. In the final 12 hours of the stifling battle, as the gray smoke from the Russian army's own Grad artillery strikes gradually dissipated, Ukrainian assault units completed the final sweep. Every bunker and every pile of rubble was tightly controlled, leaving no trace of resistance behind. Amidst the desolate landscape of the frontline village in Zaporizhia, the Ukrainian national flag was raised, flying proudly atop the central building, a steel-clad testament to the enemy's total defeat. This 4-8-hour battle was not merely a local clash to seize territory. It has become a symbol of the collapse of outdated military logic. Russia's heavy masses of steel and human wave tactics were completely broken before a defensive and counterattacking system based on intelligence, flexibility, and superior technology. Looking deep into the nature of the clash, we are witnessing a historical turning point. The era dominated by heavy tanks and indiscriminate, overwhelming firepower is gradually receding into the past. This battle is the most vivid proof that in the wars of the future, The victor is no longer the one who possesses the most steel or firepower, but the one who masters the information network, the lines of code, signals, and absolute timing. The short kill chain applied by Ukraine has torn apart classical rules of engagement, turning mobility and information connectivity into premier weapons of destruction. Thank you for joining Military Matrix in this realistic and sharp battlefield analysis. The events in Zaporizhia are not just a geographical victory, but also the answer to the puzzle of modern warfare. Please continue to follow us for in-depth perspectives and the next strategic turning points of the conflict. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss any important analysis.